The 2026 Guideline for the Early Management of Patients with Acute Ischemic Stroke, a guideline from the American Heart Association and American Stroke Association. This is the new standard.
So what's the mission statement of this update?
The mission is to update clinical practice on reperfusion therapies and hemodynamic management without delay. The 2026 guidelines emphasize expanding eligibility to populations we previously hesitated to treat.
Right. We used to have so many no-go criteria.
So many. Now, the data says we can help those people. And maybe most importantly, the guidelines are very firm on stopping practices that we now know cause harm.
Okay, let's get into the pharmacology first. Section 1, intravenous thrombolysis. For years, alteplase was the undisputed king. You had a stroke code, you were calculating for alteplase. What's the headline update for senolytic agents in 2026?
The headline is that tenecteplase is now a reasonable, and this is key, equivalent alternative to alteplase.
Okay.
We're looking at a shift in the standard of care for patients presenting within 4.5 hours of symptom onset. This isn't just an alternative for clinical trials anymore, it is a frontline option.
From a workflow perspective in the emergency department, this is significant. Alteplase requires an hour-long infusion. Tenecteplase is a single bolus.
It's a game changer for throughput.
But let's be clear on the dosing, because this is where errors happen. What is the specific approved dose for tenecteplase in this context?
The dose is 0.25 milligrams per kilogram.
0.25.
And the maximum absolute dose is 25 milligrams. That's the ceiling. You calculate the weight, you pull up the dose, and you stop at 25 milligrams, regardless of how heavy the patient is.
I want to pause there because there was a lot of discussion and some conflicting studies about higher dosing. The theory was, maybe hitting the clot harder with 0.4 milligrams per kilogram would be more effective.
Right.
Does the 2026 guidelines support that approach?
No. This is a critical safety point. Do not use the higher dose of 0.4 milligrams per kilogram.
Okay.
The guidelines classify this as providing no benefit, and it carries potential safety risks. You gain nothing in efficacy. The recanalization rates are not superior, but you significantly increase the risk of symptomatic intracranial hemorrhage. Stick to 0.25.
Got it. Moving to patient selection. We used to rely heavily on the National Institutes of Health Stroke Scale score to decide who gets lytics. We'd look at the number and make a decision. How do we select patients now?
The focus has shifted from the raw score to the nature of the deficit. We're now looking at disabling versus non-disabling deficits.
Okay.
If a patient has a disabling deficit, you treat them immediately with intravenous thrombolysis, regardless of a low NIHSS score.
Can you elaborate on the clinical judgment there? What counts as disabling?
Think about function. A low score might just be isolated hand weakness or a visual field cut. On paper, that's a minor stroke.
Right.
But if that patient is a surgeon or a truck driver, that's a disabling deficit. You treat the patient's potential for disability, not the number on the chart.
So what's the alternative? What do we do with those mild, non-disabling deficits?
You do not treat them with intravenous thrombolysis. This is a class 3 recommendation, meaning it is not recommended.
So no benefit there.
For isolated sensory syndromes or mild non-disabling deficits within that 4.5-hour window, trials have shown no benefit of thrombolysis over dual antiplatelet therapy.
So the risk of bleeding from their senolytic just outweighs any potential benefit because the deficit isn't severe enough.
Precisely. If the deficit isn't going to ruin their life, you don't expose them to the risk of a brain bleed. You manage them with antiplatelets.
Let's widen the scope. Section 2. Extended windows and imaging. The 4.5-hour clock runs out. We used to stop there. How do we manage the 4.5 to 24-hour window now?
Well, once you cross that threshold, or if the time is unknown, you need advanced imaging. You have to find salvageable brain tissue.
So you're no longer treating based on time alone?
Not at all. You're treating based on tissue viability. We're looking for the penumbra, the tissue that's stunned but not dead yet.
What's the protocol for wake-up strokes or patients with an unknown time of onset? This is a really common scenario.
It is. You need a magnetic resonance imaging scan, an MRI. Specifically, you are looking for a mismatch between diffusion-weighted imaging and fluid-attenuated inversion recovery, the DWI flare mismatch.
Explain the physiology behind that mismatch. What are we actually seeing?
So DWI shows the stroke almost immediately within minutes. It represents the cytotoxic edema. FLAIR, or flare, takes time to turn positive, usually several hours. So if you see a bright spot on DWI, meaning the stroke is happening but the flare sequence is normal, it means the stroke is fresh.
Ah, so it's new.
It indicates the event likely occurred within the last 4.5 hours.
So the imaging acts as a biological clock when the wall clock is missing.
That's a perfect way to put it. It helps identify patients who are likely within that window, making them eligible for politics despite the unknown onset time.
And if we're in the 4.5 to 9 hour window specifically?
In that 4.5 to 9 hour range, you use automated perfusion imaging. That could be CT perfusion or MR perfusion. You're quantifying the core infarct versus the penumbra to guide your decision.
Let's talk about the hardware. Section 3, endovascular thrombectomy. Who is now eligible for mechanical thrombectomy?
Eligibility has expanded a lot. We're now looking at treating patients with large ischemic cores and those with strokes in the posterior circulation. This is a big departure from older dogmas where a large stroke was an automatic exclusion.
Large ischemic cores. Used to be a hard stop. Can you be specific about what's treatable now?
You should treat patients with an Alberta Stroke Program, early CT score, or aspects of 3 to 5.
3 to 5. That's a big area of the brain.
It is. The scale runs from 10, which is normal, down to 0. A score of 3 to 5 indicates a large territory of infarction. These are patients presenting within 6 to 24 hours. The evidence now supports that we can salvage function even in these larger infarcts.
Is there a limit? At what point is the core too large to intervene?
There is. Patients with a severe hypodensity volume greater than or equal to 26 milliliters may derive no functional benefit. In those cases, the risk of cerebral edema and reperfusion injury is just too high.
You mentioned posterior circulation. Basilar artery occlusion is a devastating diagnosis. What's the guidance there?
This is a strong Class 1 recommendation. For basilar artery occlusion, you treat if they present within 24 hours, have an NIHSS score greater than or equal to 10, and a posterior circulation aspect score greater than or equal to 6.
That's an aggressive approach.
It has to be. It's an aggressive intervention for a condition that carries extremely high mortality if it's left untreated.
We're also seeing a new focus on pediatric patients. Is thrombectomy recommended for children?
Yes. For children 6 years and older, it's effective for large vessel occlusion within 24 hours. The data supports that the benefit is substantial.
And for the very young, under 6 years old?
For children aged 28 days to 6 years, it's considered reasonable. That's Class 2B. But it should be performed by experienced neurointerventionalists.
Makes sense.
The vessels are smaller, the vasospasm risk is different, but the potential for saving a lifetime of function is there.
Okay, we need to discuss a major safety pillar of these guidelines.
Yeah.
Section 4, blood pressure management. This is where the guidelines are very strict and where clinical practice can sometimes drift. What are the targets before reperfusion?
Before you start intravenous thrombolysis or perform a thrombectomy, you must lower the systolic blood pressure to less than 185 millimeters of mercury.
Under 185.
And the diastolic blood pressure must be lower than 110 millimeters of mercury. If you are above those numbers, you cannot proceed with the lytic agent. It's a hard stop.
Okay, so the procedure is done. The clot is out or the drug is in. What is the target after treatment?
You have to maintain blood pressure below 180 over 105 millimeters of mercury for at least the first 24 hours. That's the standard safety window to prevent hemorrhagic transformation.
Here is the controversy. Some clinicians think lower is better. They see a pressure of 160 and they want to normalize it down to 120. Should clinicians use intensive lowering to less than 140 millimeters of mercury?
No. Absolutely not. This is a major safety point in the 2026 guidelines.
Break that down for us. Why not? Why is a normal blood pressure bad in this context?
Post-thrombolysis, intensive lowering shows no benefit, but it gets worse. Post-thrombectomy, intensive lowering is classified as harmful. Class 3, harm.
Harmful. Wow.
It comes down to physiology. When a patient has an acute stroke, the brain loses its autoregulation.
Explain autoregulation for the listener.
Normally, your brain keeps its blood flow constant regardless of your systemic blood pressure. In an acute stroke, that mechanism fails in the affected area. The blood flow becomes pressure dependent.
So if you drop the pressure?
If you lower the systemic pressure aggressively, you directly lower the flow to the brain. You compromise collateral blood flow to the salvaged brain tissue.
So by fixing the number on the monitor, you're starving the tissue in the brain.
Exactly. You might be causing a secondary ischemic event. The data shows this leads to higher mortality and reduced functional independence. You have to let the pressure run specifically within that permitted range.
So we avoid aggressive lowering. Are there specific drugs we need to avoid in the acute phase?
Yes, there are specific agents that have been flagged. You should avoid pre-hospital transdermal glyceryl trinitrate. That is a class 3 harm.
Why is that?
It lowers pressure too unpredictably and can reduce perfusion. You also want to avoid intravenous urapidol for intensive lowering. It shows no benefit. And generally, avoid high-dose albumin or pentoxifylline. They simply don't work.
Okay, let's move to Section 5. Risk management and comorbidities. This is the messy reality of the emergency room. How do we handle patients on pre-existing antiplatelets? Say a patient on aspirin and Plavix comes in with a stroke.
You proceed with intravenous thrombolysis?
Even with the bleeding risk?
Yes. The risk-benefit analysis is clear. While there is a small increase in symptomatic intracerebral hemorrhage risk, the treatment benefit is so much greater. The math just works out in favor of treating.
What about cerebral microbleeds? We see these on MRI more and more now. Do we stop to count them?
Do not delay treatment to count every single dot. The guidance is based on burden. A low burden, which is defined as 1 to 10 microbleeds, is acceptable for treatment.
And if there are more than 10?
If there's a high burden, greater than 10, the benefit becomes uncertain. That's where you have to pause and reconsider. But for the vast majority of patients, you proceed.
Anticoagulation is common. When is it a hard stop for mediolytics?
Severe coagulopathy is the hard stop. Specifically, for patients on warfarin, an international normalized ratio, an INR greater than 1.7, is an absolute contraindication.
1.7.
You do not give a lytics.
And for patients on direct oral anticoagulants or DOACs?
If they've taken a DOAC within 48 hours, it's generally a no-go for lytics, unless you have specific reversal agents or lab values that prove there's no effect.
But thrombectomy is still an option.
Yes, remember that. Anticoagulation is not a contraindication for mechanical thrombectomy. You can still go in and physically retrieve the clot.
Let's zoom out to Section 6, Systems of Care. How we organize our response matters just as much as the drugs we use. Speed is the variable we can control. How can systems improve speed?
The utilization of mobile stroke units is a key factor. They are now a Class 1 recommendation.
So bringing the hospital to the patient.
Exactly. They significantly reduce the onset to treatment time by bringing the CT scanner and the lytics to the patient's driveway.
Right.
You are diagnosing and treating before the patient even arrives.
And once the patient hits the hospital doors, what about the transfer workflow?
If you suspect a large vessel occlusion, bypass the standard CT scanner if you can.
Go straight to the suite.
Direct triage to the angiography suite using flat panel CT is reasonable. Many modern angio suites have CT capabilities built right in. This decreases the time to puncture. Every minute lost in transfer is brain tissue lost.
A common scenario. You start IV lytics in the ER. Do you wait for the infusion to finish before moving the patient to the angio suite for thrombectomy?
Never. You use a bridging therapy approach. Administer the lytics and move immediately to the angio suite. Do not wait to see if the patient improves.
Why not wait, say, 20 minutes to see if the drug works?
Because if it doesn't work, you've just wasted 20 minutes of brain viability. If the vessel opens while you're on the way, fantastic. But you have to assume it hasn't until you see it on the angiogram.
This has been a very rapid overview of the 2026 guidelines. Let's do a quick recap of the numbers for everyone listening.
Right, to nectoplace. 0.25 milligrams per kilogram.
Pre-treatment blood pressure. Less than 185 over 110.
Post-treatment blood pressure. Less than 180 over 105.
And the big one. Avoid intensive lowering below 140 systolic.
Absolutely.
So a final thought on the philosophy behind all these changes.
I think the focus is really on physiological preservation. We've moved past just clot busting to a more holistic view of maintaining perfusion to the healing brain.
Yeah.
We have to balance removing the clot with maintaining that perfusion pressure. Aggressive correction of physiology can sometimes cause more harm than good.
Treat the tissue, not just the numbers.
That's the bottom line.
That is the takeaway. Apply these guidelines in your next shift. We are looking for speed, precision, and physiological awareness.
That's it.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.